The dust-choked streets of Redemption's Edge stretched empty under the merciless afternoon sun. A lone figure appeared on the horizon, their silhouette wavering in the heat. The townspeople watching from behind grimy windows knew better than to venture out when strangers came calling, especially ones who rode in during the devil's hour of high noon. Rose Blackwood guided her midnight stallion down the main street, past the weathered signs of the general store, saloon, and undertaker's office. Her well-worn duster concealed twin revolvers of unusual make, their pearl handles marked with symbols no gunsmith in the territory would recognize. She tracked Marshal James Drake across 3 states, following a trail of unexplained disappearances and strange lights in the night sky. The saloon doors creaked as Rose stepped inside. Conversation died as the patrons took in her appearance, raven hair streaked with a single silver strand, eyes the color of storm clouds, and a face too young to carry such determination. She approached the bar with measured steps, boot spurs ringing against the wooden floor. "Whiskey," she said, placing a silver dollar on the scratched counter. "And information about Marshal Drake." The bartender, a burly man with a mechanical prosthetic hand that whirred softly as he moved, studied her carefully. "Marshal ain't the kind of man folks talk about, miss. Not if they want to keep breathing. I'm not most folks." Rose tossed back the whiskey. "And I know what he really is." A sharp intake of breath from the corner drew her attention. An elderly man with a scholar's hands and a prospector's weathered face sat alone, papers covered in complex mathematical formulae spread before him. Their eyes met, and he gave an almost imperceptible nod. Later that evening, Rose found herself in Professor Harrison Wells' cluttered workshop behind the livery stable. Brass instruments of unknown purpose lined the walls, and a strange device hummed in a corner, measuring something beyond human perception. "You've seen them too, haven't you?" Wells asked, hands trembling as he poured tea into chipped cups. "The lights, the impossible things that happen around Drake." Rose placed her revolvers on the table, their unusual markings catching the lamplight. "These belonged to my father. He was a lawman in Arizona Territory until Drake arrived. A week later, my father vanished, leaving only these and a journal full of warnings about those who watch from above." Wells nodded frantically. "Drake isn't human. None of them are. They've been here for decades, maybe centuries, guiding human development like ranchers herding cattle. But lately, something's changed. The frequency of their appearances has increased. My instruments detect temporal disturbances growing stronger each day." "What do they want?" Rose asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Control," Wells replied. "They believe humanity needs supervision, like children who can't be trusted with matches. Drake enforces their rules, eliminating anyone who makes too many technological advances too quickly. But there's something else coming, something that has them frightened." A distant explosion rocked the workshop, sending instruments crashing to the floor. Rose rushed to the window. Green light illuminated the clouds above the marshal's office, pulsing with an otherworldly rhythm. "They're here," Wells whispered, his face pale. "The ones Drake's been trying to keep out. The harvesters." Rose checked her revolvers, the symbols on their handles beginning to glow with a faint blue light. "My father's last journal entry mentioned them. He wrote that humanity's only hope was to break free from our invisible cage, even if it meant facing worse dangers." "You don't understand," Wells grabbed her arm. "Drake may be a tyrant, but he's maintaining order. Kill him, and there's nothing to stop the harvesters from tearing our reality apart." Rose gently removed his hand. "Maybe it's time humanity fought its own battles, Professor. Better to die on our feet than live on our knees." She stepped into the street as more explosions lit up the night sky. Marshal Drake stood in front of his office, his human disguise flickering like a faulty lantern to reveal metallic skin beneath. Their eyes met across the distance, and Rose knew the time for hiding was over. Tomorrow, she would face him in the street, not just for vengeance, but for humanity's right to forge its own destiny. As she walked back to the hotel, the strange symbols on her revolvers pulsed in time with her heartbeat, as if awakening to their true purpose after years of slumber. The fate of Redemption's Edge, and perhaps all of humanity, would be decided when the sun rose over the desert horizon. Dawn painted the desert sky in shades of blood and gold. Rose stood in the middle of Main Street, her breath visible in the morning chill. Marshal Drake emerged from his office, his human appearance now barely containing the otherworldly entity beneath. Each step he took left small craters in the dirt, his true mask betraying his disguise. "You're either brave or foolish, girl," Drake's voice resonated with metallic undertones. "Your father made the same choice. He couldn't accept the natural order." The natural order. Rose's fingers hovered near her revolvers. "There's nothing natural about stunting human progress. We have a right to grow, to evolve." Drake's laugh shattered windows along the street. "You speak of rights like children demanding matches in a gunpowder warehouse. We've guided humanity for millennia, preventing you from destroying yourselves before you're ready." The rising sun cast long shadows across the street, but an unnatural darkness gathered at the edges of town. Professor Wells watched from his workshop, his instrument spinning wildly as reality itself seemed to warp around the two figures. "Last chance," Drake warned, his badge glowing with an inner light. "Walk away. Continue your father's pointless crusade elsewhere." Rose's response was to draw both revolvers in a single fluid motion. The symbols etched on their barrels blazed to life, responding to the otherworldly energy saturating the air. "My father discovered what you really were." These weapons were his legacy, proof that humanity can master the technologies you've kept from us. Drake's human disguise fell away completely, revealing a towering figure of living metal and light. "Then you'll share his fate." The battle that followed defied conventional physics. Drake moved with impossible speed, each shot from his own weapon tearing holes in reality itself. Rose rolled and dodged, her father's revolvers firing bullets that left trails of blue fire in the air. Each impact on Drake's metallic form released bursts of temporal energy that caused time to fluctuate around them. Flowers bloomed and died in seconds, wood rotted and restored itself, and the very air crackled with displacement. "Your kind has no concept of the forces you're tampering with," Drake roared, his voice shaking the earth. "The harvesters are drawn to temporal instability. This confrontation alone will attract them." As if summoned by his words, the darkness at the town's edge began to move with purpose. Shapes emerged, twisted geometries that hurt the eyes to look upon. The air filled with a high-pitched whine that made blood run from the ears of watching townspeople. Rose saw her chance as Drake turned to face the emerging threat. Her revolvers spoke in unison, their specialized rounds striking Drake's temporal core, the badge he wore as both disguise and power source. The resulting explosion sent both combatants flying. When the dust settled, Drake lay broken, his metallic form slowly disintegrating. Rose staggered to her feet, her clothes smoking but her resolve unshaken. She approached her fallen opponent, revolvers ready. "You don't understand what you've done," Drake's voice was fading, his form becoming transparent. "I was not your enemy. I was your shield." "No," Rose replied firmly. "You were our cage." The darkness at the edge of town grew deeper, and now massive shapes could be seen moving within it. The harvesters were no longer content to merely watch. Professor Wells burst from his workshop, waving frantically. "Rose! The temporal readings are off the scale. They're coming through." Drake's final words carried on the wind as his form dispersed completely. "There are worse things than captivity, child. You'll learn that soon enough." Rose turned to face the advancing darkness, her father's revolvers humming with power. Behind her, townspeople emerged from their hiding places, armed with everything from conventional weapons to Wells' experimental devices. If humanity was to face this threat, they would face it together. The first harvester emerged fully into their reality, a massive, shifting form that seemed to be made of living shadow and broken time. Rose raised her weapons, the symbols glowing brighter than ever. "Professor," she called out, "tell everyone to fall back to your workshop. If my father's journals were right, those symbols you've been studying are more than just decorations. They're instructions." As the townspeople retreated, Rose stood her ground. The knowledge in her father's weapons had awakened something in her, an understanding of forces humanity was never meant to be shielded from. Whether they survived the coming storm or not, at least they would face it on their own terms. The harvester reached for her with appendages that existed in multiple dimensions at once, and Rose Blackwood, daughter of a man who dared to learn too much, squeezed both triggers. The real battle for humanity's future was about to begin. The harvester's scream existed in multiple dimensions at once, shattering every window in Redemption's edge and causing reality to ripple like a disturbed pond. Rose's shots had torn holes in its shadowy mass, revealing glimpses of other times and places through the wounds, prehistoric jungles, gleaming future cities, and impossible landscapes that hurt the mind to observe. Professor Wells worked frantically in his workshop, surrounded by townspeople who had taken shelter there. His machines whirred and sparked as he attempted to decipher the symbols that matched those on Rose's revolvers. The walls creaked under the pressure of distorted time outside. "The symbols," he muttered, fingers tracing patterns in the air. "They're not just writing, they're mathematical formulas, equations that describe the fabric of reality itself." Rose backed toward the workshop, firing precisely at the advancing harvester. Each shot created a small bubble of stable time in the chaos, but more shadows were emerging from the temporal breach Drake's death had created. The air itself was becoming thick and strange, filled with overlapping moments from past and future. "Whatever you're going to do, Professor, do it fast," Rose shouted as she reloaded. The bullets in her belt glowed with the same blue light as the symbols, each one a small miracle of engineering her father had left behind. Inside the workshop, Tom Tucker, the saloon's piano player, noticed something strange. The random notes emanating from Wells' instruments began to form a pattern. "Professor," he called out, "listen to that rhythm, it's like a song." Wells' eyes widened. "Of course. The symbols aren't just equations, they're frequencies. Your father," he yelled to Rose, "he wasn't just building weapons. He was trying to find the resonant frequency of reality itself." The largest harvester yet emerged from the breach, its form a twisted mass of temporal energy that bent light around it. As it moved, people caught in its wake began to age or de-age randomly. A young boy became an old man in seconds, while his mother reverted to childhood beside him. Rose felt the revolver's pulse in her hands, responding to the professor's instruments. The symbols began to shift and change, reorganizing themselves like living things. "What do I do?" she called back. "The frequencies." Wells adjusted his machines, causing them to emit a harmonious tone that made reality shiver. "Your weapons, they're tuning forks for the universe. The right combination of shots could stabilize the temporal field." The townspeople who still had their wits about them began to gather behind Rose. Jack Morton, the blacksmith, brought his hammer down on a piece of Wells' equipment in a steady rhythm, matching the tone it produced. Others joined in, creating a strange symphony of sound. Rose felt it then, a pattern in the chaos, a weakness in the fabric of what the harvesters were doing. She raised her revolvers, no longer aiming at the creatures themselves but at specific points in the air around them. Each shot rang out in perfect time with the improvised orchestra behind her. The effects were immediate and spectacular. Where her bullet struck, reality snapped back into focus. The harvesters shrieked in frequencies that existed outside of normal spacetime, their forms beginning to unravel as the stabilizing wave spread. But victory came with a price. The energy released by the harvesters' dissolution threatened to tear the town apart. Buildings warped and twisted, streets buckled, and the very ground beneath their feet began to shift between states of matter. "The breach!" Wells shouted over the dimensional chaos. "It's becoming self-sustaining. Without Drake's presence to regulate it, it'll continue to grow." Rose looked at her revolvers, understanding flowing through her from the symbols that now moved like quicksilver across their surface. "There's one more thing to try," she said quietly. "Professor, keep that frequency going. Everyone else, get as far from the breach as you can." Before anyone could stop her, Rose sprinted toward the temporal tear, both revolvers held out before her. The symbols on their barrels aligned perfectly with the shape of the breach, creating a complex geometric pattern in the air. "Your father theorized this might be possible," Wells called after her, "but the energy required, it could kill you." Rose didn't hesitate. "Better me than the whole town." She pressed the revolvers together, their symbols interconnecting, forming a key to lock reality back into place. Besides, she smiled grimly, someone has to show those starfolk that humanity can clean up its own messes. The revolvers began to vibrate, drawing power from the breach itself. Rose felt the energy course through her body, every cell screaming in protest as she became a conduit for forces beyond human comprehension. In that moment, she understood what her father had discovered: the universe wasn't meant to be controlled, only understood and respected. She pulled both triggers simultaneously, and Redemption's edge vanished in a flash of light that could be seen from 3 states away. But this wasn't the end of the story. It was merely the beginning of something far more extraordinary. When the light faded, Redemption's edge still stood, though forever changed. The town existed in a bubble of altered reality, where the laws of physics bent just slightly around the edges of perception. Rose lay in the crater where the breach had been, her father's revolvers fused together into a single device that pulsed with otherworldly energy. Professor Wells was the first to reach her, his instruments detecting patterns in the air that shouldn't exist. "Impossible," he whispered, helping her to her feet. "You've done something unprecedented. The breach isn't just closed, it's been transformed." Rose stood unsteadily, her eyes now flickering with the same blue energy that had marked her weapons. The experience had changed her, written the universe's equations into her very being. "Not transformed," she corrected, her voice echoing strangely. "Tamed." The crater had become a window of sorts, a controlled portal that showed glimpses of other times and places. But unlike the chaotic tear the harvesters had created, this one was stable, contained by the mathematical principles Rose's father had discovered. The townspeople gathered around the edge, watching in wonder as images shifted in its depths. Through it, they could see other worlds, other civilizations that had faced similar challenges. Some had succeeded in breaking free from their overseers, while others had fallen to the harvesters. "Your father's research," Wells said, examining the fused weapons. "He wasn't just studying their technology, he was trying to find a middle path. A way for humanity to join the greater universe without being either controlled or destroyed." Town Marshal Rebecca Hawthorne, who had watched the entire battle from the jail's roof, stepped forward. "So what happens now? Those things that Drake was holding back, they'll come looking for us." Rose touched the crater's edge, sending ripples through the portal's surface. "They already are. But we're not helpless anymore." She turned to address the gathered crowd. "Drake thought humanity needed to be contained, protected from ourselves. The harvesters saw us as nothing but a resource to be consumed. They were both wrong." Inside Wells' workshop, his instruments had begun arranging themselves into new configurations, responding to the altered reality around them. The symbols from Rose's weapons appeared on their surfaces, teaching their secrets to those willing to learn. "We need to prepare," Rose continued. "What happened here today will draw attention from both sides. Redemption's Edge isn't just a town anymore, it's humanity's first step into a larger universe." Over the next few days, the town transformed itself. Wells and a group of eager students began decoding the symbols, learning to harness the principles they represented. The blacksmith's forge became a laboratory for merging conventional technology with their new understanding of reality's underlying structure. But it wasn't just about weapons and defenses. The portal in the crater showed them possibilities: clean energy, advanced medicine, ways of living that balanced progress with preservation. Rose spent hours by its edge, learning from the successes and failures of other worlds. The saloon became a meeting hall where people shared what they'd learned. Tom Tucker discovered that certain musical frequencies could stabilize temporal fluctuations, and soon a chorus of specially tuned instruments protected the town's borders. Yet danger lurked on the horizon. Strange lights appeared in the night sky, and Wells' instruments detected massive objects decelerating from faster-than-light speeds. The Harvester's masters had noticed their failed incursion, and Drake's superiors had surely noticed his absence. One evening, as Rose stood watch over the portal, she saw a familiar figure in its depths, her father, moving through a dimension parallel to their own. He was alive, after a fashion, still fighting his own battle against those who would keep humanity bound. "We'll find you," she promised, pressing her hand against the barrier between worlds. "But first, we need to make sure there's a home for you to come back to." A signal came from Wells' workshop. They had decoded another set of symbols, these showing how to extend the town's temporal barrier. Soon, other settlements would need to make the same choice Redemption's Edge had: embrace the strange new reality, or remain in comfortable ignorance. Rose looked up at the stars, seeing them now as they truly were, not just points of light, but doorways to countless possibilities. Humanity's next chapter would be written not in ink, but in the very substance of reality itself. The war for Earth's future was about to begin, and Redemption's Edge would stand as humanity's first line of defense. The skies above Redemption's Edge blazed with otherworldly light as massive ships descended through the atmosphere. Their surfaces rippled like liquid metal, displaying symbols similar to those that had marked Rose's revolvers. But where her father's work had sought harmony with universal laws, these visitors radiated cold authority. From her position atop the modified water tower, Rose watched them approach. The merged remnants of her father's weapons hummed at her side, synchronized with the network of temporal stabilizers Professor Wells and the townspeople had constructed throughout Redemption's Edge. "They're here," Wells' voice crackled through one of his modified telegraph devices. "Both sides at once, the regulators and the harvesters. Our instruments detect at least 12 ships, with more arriving." "Good," Rose replied, her altered eyes tracking energy patterns invisible to normal human sight. "Let them come. Everyone in position." Throughout the town, people prepared for the coming storm. Tom Tucker led his choir in the specially tuned harmonics that strengthened their temporal barrier. Jack Morton and his apprentices manned the repurposed mining equipment, now infused with principles drawn from Rose's father's research. Marshall Hawthorne coordinated the defense teams, each armed with weapons that could affect multiple dimensions at once. The first ship landed just outside town, a perfect silver sphere that made the air shimmer around it. A figure emerged that reminded Rose of Drake, but far more imposing. Its form shifted between human appearance and something that hurt the mind to look upon directly. "This experiment ends now," the figure's voice resonated on multiple frequencies. "Your species has exceeded its authorized development parameters. Withdraw your defenses and prepare for recalibration." Before Rose could respond, the darkness between the stars deepened. The harvesters had arrived in force, their ships like tears in reality itself. They cared nothing for authorized parameters or controlled development, they saw only an opportunity to feast on a reality made unstable by conflict. Rose stood atop the water tower, addressing both groups. "Humanity is not your experiment," her voice carried strange harmonics learned from the portal. "Nor are we your food. We choose our own path." The regulator's response was immediate, a wave of energy that should have reverted the town to a pre-industrial state. But it crashed against their temporal barrier, transformed by the mathematics of Rose's father's work into pure light that fed their defenses. The battle that followed would be remembered in whispered legends for generations. The harvesters descended like living shadows, only to be met by Jack Morton's crews wielding devices that could solidify time itself. Tom Tucker's choir sang reality into stability, their voices creating safe zones in the chaos. Rose moved through it all like a conductor directing a cosmic orchestra. The merged revolvers had become something else entirely, not just a weapon, but a key to understanding how reality could be reshaped by those who truly comprehended its patterns. Professor Wells coordinated from his workshop, now a nexus of temporal science. "The portal's showing something," he called to Rose. "Other towns, other cities, they're watching through the breach we've stabilized. They're learning." That was what the regulators feared most, Rose realized. Not that humanity would destroy itself, but that it would learn to stand as equals among the stars. The harvesters, sensing their meal slipping away, launched a final, desperate assault. Reality buckled under the strain of opposing forces. But where such chaos would once have torn the town apart, now it flowed through patterns the townspeople had learned to create. Every attack made them stronger, every attempt at control taught them more about true freedom. In the end, it came down to a choice. Rose stood at the crater's edge, the portal showing infinite possibilities. With one action, she could seal their town away, safe from both sides but isolated from the rest of humanity. Or, "Professor," she called out, "remember what you said about frequencies? About how everything in the universe resonates?" Wells' eyes widened as he understood. "The whole planet, you can't mean to." "My father found the key," Rose held up the fused weapons. "But it was never meant for just one town." Before either the regulators or the harvesters could react, Rose began to play the universe's music through the portal itself. The stabilized breach became a tuning fork for Earth, spreading temporal awakening across the globe. Every human being felt it, a moment of clarity, of understanding that they were part of something far greater than they had imagined. The regulators' ships retreated first, recognizing that their experiment had grown beyond their control. The harvesters, finding their feast transformed into a force that could fight back, fled into the spaces between dimensions. As the sun rose over redemption's edge, Rose watched new lights appear in the distance, other towns and cities reaching out, ready to join in humanity's next great adventure. The portal in the crater shifted, showing not just other worlds now, but the path to humanity's rightful place among them. "So," Marshall Hawthorne asked, cleaning a temporal rifle, "what do we do now?" Rose smiled, seeing her father's face in the portal, closer now than ever before. "Now we really get to work. The universe is a lot bigger than we thought, and humanity's got some catching up to do." Above them, the stars seemed brighter somehow, no longer distant lights but doorways waiting to be opened. Redemption's edge had become more than a town, it was the first chapter in humanity's new story. And this time, they would write it themselves.